Brad Watson's new novel is set in his hometown of Meridian, Mississippi. The Heaven of Mercury was runner-up for the National Book Award in Fiction. Watson stopped by the Alabama Booksmith in Homewood, Alabama, where we sat and talked. Brad, thank you for coming in today and sitting down to have this talk.
My pleasure.
I've been looking forward to this talk for years.
20 years.
You have not been on the show before, and other people out there in the world don't know as much about your life as the folks in Tuscaloosa might. Right now, in a way, you've come into a full circle. Your novel, The Heaven of Mercury, was set in a Meridian, and that's where you started out. And I don't know where you're going to go next, but for right now, you're back, in a sense, where you were raised. That is your home, right?
Yeah, I was raised there.
Go to school there?
I went to public schools there, in high school.
And then you're an educated man. Did you then go off to college?
I did. I went to first I went to junior college in Meridian, 2 years. Then to Mississippi State, where I finished up.
And what is the rumor that I hear about your having gone to Hollywood as a boy?
I did, and I was a boy, although I was married already. I married in high school. My first son was born then. And I'd been doing local theater, and my dad thought it would be a good idea for me to try Hollywood since I had no other prospects, really.
Well, how old were you?
I was 17, just right after I graduated, before I turned 18. I got on a plane and flew out there to try to be a movie actor, and they had set up a job in the studios for me. There was a family contact through shoes, as a matter of fact, through shoe salesmen. And as soon as I landed and met these people, my uncle knew. They said, well, the studios are on strike, and you don't have a job, and you should go home. But I said, no, as long as I'm here, I'll give it a try. So I stayed there several months trying to get acting contacts, and I did a lot of jobs and ended up being garbage man.
You were a Hollywood garbage man?
I was a Hollywood garbage man. I picked up Technicolor Studios, among other places. And
Harrison Ford was a Hollywood carpenter.
Carpenter, that's right.
Worked out for him?
Which is a much more skillful occupation. It takes more skill.
Did you work for the city, or did you work for
No,
a private contractor?
I worked for a private contractor named Zarko Demusian, who had one truck and one employee, and it was me. That was it.
Yeah. You got interested enough, not just in the study of literature, but also, obviously, in writing, to come over to the MFA program in Alabama. And thinking back on those years, those were really interesting years.
They were.
You had a pretty impressive array of writing teachers. Of course you can remember. I mean, I remember that Barry Hanna was there. Who else was there?
Barry was there when I arrived, and in between Barry and Alan Wire, who came to replace him on a permanent basis, was David Hughes, the British writer, who came to do a visiting stint, and Chuck Kinder, whose novel Honeymooners was about Raymond Carver and him in San Francisco in the 60s, and who brought Raymond Carver there to visit us for a while, and Don Hendry, who Alan Wire hired after he got there.
I don't always ask this because I finally got tired of asking it. But once more can't hurt. You did do an MFA in fiction writing. You have become a successful fiction writer. Do you think that this is a cause and effect relationship, or do you think it's a coincidental relationship? Does it work?
Well, I got an MFA, and I've been teaching creative writing for some time now, some years. I have something of a contentious relationship with the whole business myself at this point. It's difficult, I think, it's difficult to teach people something about writing. I think a lot of what young writers learn simply comes from reading carefully, reading like a writer, and doing a lot of writing and turning it out and failing and going back. Sometimes I think that writing schools are more of a sort of comfort zone for developing writers. allow them for a while to be among other people who are struggling with the same things, and if they have teachers who care about them, then they get the kind of support they need, the moral support they need, and sometimes you get some wise things from those writers. It's one thing that's nice about it, I think, is just to watch those writers who have made a life in writing for themselves live their lives and continue to work, and to watch that, to see their habits, and to learn about them as people, and to make it seem like something that's more attainable than it seemed when you were starting, when it seemed so far off.
It was a number of years from the time that you finished your MFA, which was a collection of stories, to the time that The Last Days of the Dogman was published. I don't remember how many years, and we don't need to know. But it was a while. And I was always curious about, since you had a handful of stories to begin with, I expected to see them sooner. Some of them never were finally put out in published form. Mm-hmm. What was the process? What took so long? What were the factors that went into the way that first volume of stories finally appeared?
First of all, well, a few of those early stories were published, but yeah, about half of them were not. And I think that's because they probably just weren't good enough, to tell you the truth. The first collection, my thesis, was uneven, like a lot of theses. And then I went off and was a journalist for a number of years, and I really stopped writing fiction for a few years. I didn't like where my stories were going. I felt very limited in many ways, and I wanted to work some things out personally. When I took it up again after a few years in earnest, there was a lot of rust, and I'm slow anyway. I tend to work on several stories at once and sort of juggle them and feel my way in. I'm a very intuitive writer. I take a long time, and yeah, I am a perfectionist. It's rare that I've knocked out a story that I wasn't aiming too high while writing it. In fact, I was having a conversation with George Singleton recently, and George is a very prolific story writer, and we were talking about this, and that's what George said. He said, "You aim too high." And I thought, well, you're right. I probably do. I'm always trying to hit it out of the park. Sort of, I'm the guy who wants to be the home run hitter and strikes out a lot. So I've got filing cabinets full of either failed stories or stories that maybe will be something one day or that I'll just never go back to.
When talking to writers who have been journalists, or in reading biographies of writers, Hemingway, doesn't matter, John O'Hara, people who have been journalists, one always gets a mixed response. Some people think, oh, that's wonderful because it demystifies writing and it makes writing, an everyday activity not so terrifying. And the other people say, oh, it kills the writer, it makes them dull. Mm. What looking back at your stints with newspapers, and there were 2 or 3 papers stretched out there. Mm-hmm. What was good about it? What accelerated your writing career, and what wasn't so good?
The good thing was that it worked in terms of giving me a break in many ways from, for getting me out of the rut I was in as a fiction writer, just stopping fiction writing for a while, and getting out of the university for a while, which I think was really important for me. I'd forgotten what people did outside the walls of academia, and I thought my stories were becoming narrower and narrower in terms of the people who were in there and the concerns in the stories. So I talked to a lot of different kind of people. I heard other voices again. I heard a lot of good stories. It sort of opened my brain up to the possibilities for things to write about, and that was good. It does demystify the writing process a little bit, even though I think that such different kinds of writing. When I was doing newspaper writing, it was nothing like the way I work when I'm working on a piece of fiction. But the fact that you sit down, you get the story out, you have a deadline that day, you write it, and sometimes you write something that's not bad. You do realize that you're maybe being a little bit too much of a dandy, in the way you approach your fiction writing, and that you can do some good, honest work, and then you can go back and work on that. So when I came back to fiction writing after being a journalist, I looked back, I thought it was a healthy experience because I tended not to worry and agonize so much on the early drafts of my stories, and I tended to work a little bit faster on those and to have faith that I could go back and make them better.
When the book finally appeared, as the title will tell any reader, they're dogs. There's at least one dog in every story.
Right, at least.
Well, is this a parlor trick? At what point did you think, look, I've got a lot of stories about dogs with dogs in them?
It wasn't my idea to make the stories all have dogs in them. I sent in a collection with 14 stories, including many of those that were in my thesis. But I think only one of those older stories had a dog in it. The rest of them were new. I had started trying to write a novel, a novella, in which I would include, it's kind of experimental, I would include a lot of dog anecdotes. So I started collecting all these dog stories. That didn't work out, and I ended up with the one story, Last Days of the Dogman, having trimmed it down and found a shape for it. But I had several other stories that seemed as if they deserved to be pieces in their own right, so I wrote those too. I had 7 dog stories, 7 non-dog stories, sent them in. My editor said, I like your work, but I don't want to publish it, but what would you think about doing just the dog stories? And my first thought was, yeah, sounds gimmicky, does sound sort of like a parlor trick. I talked to some friends about it, including Will Blythe, who was a classmate at Alabama and was now in New York as a magazine editor. He said, well, they're good stories, and as long as they're good stories, I don't think you have to worry about it seeming gimmicky. Just have faith in the work. So I did. And I had one extra. I wrote one more story. I was working on another story with a dog, and I thought, well, as long as it's going to be a collection of dog stories, maybe we'll finish this one.
Well, there are the 2 men who live in the cabin and have dogs, and then there's a husband and wife who go to buy a dog, and there's a blind man with a seeing eye dog. I mean, it goes right along. There are lots of dogs.
Older woman with a dog and her husband's dog. And it's not just a book with men and dogs, as which,
no.
Some people, there are a lot of stories about women and dogs. It's not just a man's, the southern good old boy, dog book, which I think some people think when they see the title, and even some of the reviews seem to reflect that.
No, I don't think it's that at all. I mean, there's very little of the man, shotgun, and dog in this book. The dogs are integrated into people's lives in a very, very intimate, everyday, inside the house way. I like the dogs,
Well, I think Barry's comment, when he wrote a blurb for the book, was that he liked the dogs a lot better than the people, that they were more interesting.
Well, some of them are. Some of them are very clever. Recently, Updike put out a huge volume of stories. He's been writing stories for 50 years. And he just put out 103 stories that were published in his first 25 years. And one of the reviews I read of it said, we are all pilgrims on the road to divorce. This was a kind of encapsulation of Updike's first 25 years, which I think was a very strange thing to say. In the stories, though, and then later in the novel, there's a lot of people who don't connect right. What do you think a reader would take away from your stories, and then the novel, about the prospects for happiness, the prospects for satisfaction, the prospects for love?
They would take away a fairly gloomy overview of that, I think.
Well, it does happen.
Yeah, well, the early stories, when I said I was trying to change as a writer, and my earliest stories, I think, were bitter little stories about divorce and breakups and bad relationships and so forth. And I come back having felt I opened my world up and look back at that now, and lo and behold, I'm still writing stories in which people have a lot of difficulty in that way.
Oh, but it's very different. I mean, I think the people in the novel live long and complicated lives, and in many ways satisfactory lives. I mean, we're not all going to live blissful lives. There's going to be plenty of misery. But in the stories, there are catastrophes. People, are those a young man's stories?
No, but I don't think I felt so much like a young man when I was writing the other stories either. I think I felt a little prematurely old in that way. I mean, in my personal experience, I've seen a lot of that in my family, and I don't know to what degree that colored my view of these things or helped to bring about some sort of vision of life between men and women or family life. But I think I do have some sort of inherent belief that it's the pursuit of an ideal in a way, and the more idealistic the participants, the more disappointing and difficult it's going to be. And I think that's true in the novel. I think it's harder to get at that in the short stories, although the two longer ones in the
title story,
yeah,
both men have significant others,
mm-hmm.
and in the course of things,
yeah,
both relationships are fatally wounded.
Yes.
Those stories, almost immediately after they were published, were translated into several foreign languages. German, I think, and then Scandinavian countries. Where did The Last Days of the Dogmen go?
The Last Days of the Dogmen went to England, Germany, and I think that was it. Unofficially, there was a translation into I forget. This was a translator who did not get the book published. It was from the Netherlands, I think.
You have two books. The first book won the Sue Kaufman Prize. The second book was, as far as I'm concerned, the runner-up for the National Book Award in Fiction. And I think that's just marvelous. I mean, that really, you talk about hitting a home run. Well, in a sense, it could have been slightly better with the NBA. But
ground rule double.
Yeah, well, no, you hit you hit two long balls. The Sue Kaufman Prize, for people who may not know, what is it?
It's an award presented every year by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Eminent writers, U.S. writers, form committees for these various prizes, and I think publishers submit, and they review and make their choices.
What are the criteria for the Sue Kaufman Award?
First book of fiction.
Long or short fiction?
Long or short. Yeah.
So your short stories beat out that year's novels for that prize?
I guess so, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, usually novels are stronger
right.
in these competitions.
Right.
And why should we know who Sue Kaufman is?
Well, Diary of a Mad Housewife.
Well, that's nice. I mean, she deserves that, right? And then the NBA, and I'll bet you've been reading the same stuff in the last couple of months that I have in the Times about the National Book Awards and how they're different from the Pulitzer and what factors go into that award. That they tend to be, that the finalists for the National Book Award in Fiction tend to be a little quirkier and less popular novels than the ones that go out and contend for the Pulitzer. What do you think about all that? How would you distinguish between the NBA in fiction and the Pulitzer?
Well, I think it's kind of maybe it feels more fitting, I guess, that my book was involved in the National Book Award. I think it's less buttoned down, much more of a sort of kind of a street fighter version of the awards, as opposed to the Queensberry Rules version and the Pulitzer. I don't know if the Pulitzer committees change every year or not, but they recruit people for these committees on the National Book Award from the ranks of American writers, and for some reason they tend to go against the grain. They often choose people for their finalists whose books are not the favored books, are not getting the most attention, are not being talked up as a potential prize winner, and so forth.
And they're not bestsellers.
And they're not bestsellers.
The novel, wonderful book, beautifully done. I've enjoyed it immensely. Why do you have chapter headings in Latin?
Or faux Latin.
Or faux Latin. Finus. We could look some of these up. Do you remember some of them offhand?
Well, the first one is Finus Ex Machinus.
Yes.
And
Right.
Machina, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I was that came first. I had this chapter wherein Finus is operating the radio tower, turns the signal on, and it occurred to me the connection between the Deus Ex Machina in the Greek tragedy or in Greek plays and his, the god of the machine, feeling like he was sort of an intermediary.
Yeah, there must be 10 of these, though.
There are more than that. Well, after that, I just started. It occurred to me it might be fun to do it in other ways too, because I just had so much fun doing that. I was just delighted by it, maybe a little bit impish. And I don't know Latin because I was kicked out of Latin in the 9th grade for misbehaving and banished to chorus class, which is what led to my acting thing. But
Well, that's the law of unintended consequences altogether, isn't it?
Right, right. So I was just having fun, and the hard thing was to rein myself in and not do it in every chapter and just get awfully silly with it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they had resonance, and they sure were a lot of fun to work with.
Are you now, or have you ever been associated with the mortuary business?
No, I haven't. No.
But there's a lot of funeral home mortuary people in this
Mhm.
novel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of it is very funny. Some of it is quite strange.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is funny and strange.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you imagine that the mortuary business to be important in the life of the town? I mean, you put a lot of, I don't know what percentage it would be, but it's a pretty healthy chunk of the novel is 2 generations of morticians.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a novel about the relationship between life and death, and certainly Parnell gave me the opportunity to invest the preoccupation with death with certain preoccupations about sex, and so life, sex, death, these things all intermingle, and Parnell is a good vehicle for getting at certain aspects of that you couldn't get to with someone like Finus, who's a little bit more remote.
And his father, this is not an imitation question, this is a real question. What was his father doing with those bodies that were being sent off to the federal government for some sort of experimentation?
I read.
You never did say, did you?
Yeah, I think I do say, but quickly in passing, or maybe it's just implied. But I remember reading that at one point, a news report, that at one point the government was buying on the sly bodies to use in atomic energy experiments to see how human bodies would hold up at certain distances from nuclear test explosions. And so I just made a leap from there, and I mean, I can't remember if the news story said that they were although in my memory, which is faulty and shifted for convenience sake, it seems like though that there were some bodies that were removed without anyone's permission and sold for a profit for use in such experiments.
People always want to know, what are you going to do for me next? What is likely to be the next project?
Well, I'm trying to say, and now for something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not writing anything that I think could be called, as one of my students put it, a grand Southern saga. It's at this point the canvas isn't as large and isn't as varied. It's more of one person's story.
Fiction.
Fiction.
Novel.
Novel and some news stories.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of longer ones, novella length, and some other regular short stories, and a novel. But typically, I am working on 2 novels. I got one is pretty at this point straightforward, realistic story told in first person. Another's a little bit more, I wouldn't say experimental, but I'm taking bigger risks and trying to do something which feels a little bit different.
Where are they set?
The more straightforward or traditional story is set in Meridian.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not calling it Mercury right now. It's just Meridian because I'm not doing anything strange with it. The other one is set in all kinds of places and partly on the road, which is why the working title is Motorists.
You spent, was it 5 years? Was it 5?
Mm-hmm.
At Harvard,
Mm-hmm.
teaching fiction writing?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it in your work. I'm not seeing any stories set on Cape Cod or in Cambridge or in...
Oh, I thought you meant any sort of bad effect from having taught
No,
at
no, no,
Harvard.
no, no. I'm not seeing a story set in the Commons or set
Yeah.
in the Yard or set
Yeah.
anywhere around the Boston area or the Cape Cod area. Has that not worked its way into your fictional mind yet?
Not yet. As slowly as I work, it'll probably be a while. The whole time I was there, I was working on stories set in Mississippi.
Well then, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing it again after the next book.
Me too.
To order a copy of the show on videotape or DVD, or to purchase a book by one of the featured writers, call 205-870-4242 or email booksmith@mindspring.com.